Okay, here goes, section 13 of Terry Pratchett's Night Watch. I still have a cold, so I'm sorry if my reading's really not doing this justice today. I will try not to have a coughing fit, but bear with me if I do. Okay, let's go. The assassin moved quietly from roof to roof until he was well away from the excitement around the watch house. His movements could be called cat-like, except he did not stop to spray urine up against things. Eventually he reached one of the upper world's many hidden places, where several thickets of chimneys made a little hidden space, invisible from the ground and from most of the surrounding roofscape. He didn't enter it immediately, but circled it for a while, moving with absolute silence from one vantage point to another. What would have intrigued a watcher who knew the ways of Ankh-Morpork's guild of assassins was how invisible this one was. When he moved, you saw movement. When he stopped, he wasn't there. Magic would have been suspected, and, in an oblique way, the watcher would have been right. 90% of most magic consists of knowing one extra fact. Great Pratchett maxim. At last the man appeared satisfied, and dropped into the space. He picked up a bag from its nesting place between the smoking pots, and there was some faint swishing and heavier breathing that suggested clothes were being changed. After a minute or so he emerged from the hidden niche, and now, somehow, he was visible. Hard to see, yes, one shadow among others, but nevertheless there, in a way that he'd not been before, when he had been as visible as the breeze. He dropped lightly into a lean-to roof, and thence to the ground, where he stepped into a handy shadow. Then there was a further transformation. It was done quite easily. The evil little crossbow was disassembled and slipped into the pockets of a clink-free velvet bag. The soft leather slippers were exchanged for a pair of heavier boots that had been stashed in the shadow, and the black hood was pushed back. He walked lightly around the corner and waited a few minutes, wiping his face. A coach came along, its torches trailing flame. It slowed briefly, and its door opened and shut. The assassin settled back in his seat as the coach picked up speed again. There was a very faint lamp in the carriage. Its glow revealed a female figure relaxing in the shadows opposite. As the coach passed a street torch, there was a suggestion of lilac silk. "You've missed a bit," said the figure. It produced a lilac-coloured handkerchief and held it in front of the young man's face. "Spit!" came the command. Reluctantly, he did so. A hand wiped his cheek, and then he held the cloth up to the light. "Dark green," said the woman. "How strange. I understand, Havelock, that you scored 0 in your examination for stealthy movement." "May I ask how you found that out, madam?" "Oh, one hears things," madam said lightly. "One just has to hold money up to one's ear." "Well, it was true," said the assassin. "And why was this?" "The examiner thought I'd used trickery, madam." "And did you?" "Of course. I thought that was the idea." "And you never attended his lessons," he said. "Oh, I did, religiously." "He says he never saw you in any of them." Havelock smiled. "And your point, madam, is—" Madam laughed. "Will you take some champagne?" There was the sound of bottle moving in an ice bucket. "Thank you, madam, but no." "As you wish. I shall. And now, report, please." "I can't believe what I saw. I thought he was a thug. And he is a thug. You can see his muscles thinking for him, but he overrules them moment by moment. I think I saw a genius at work, but—" "What?" "He's just a sergeant, madam." "Don't underestimate him on that account. It's a very useful rank for the right man, the optimum balance of power and responsibility. Incidentally, they say he can read the street through the soles of his boots, and keeps them very thin for that purpose." There are plenty of different surfaces, that's true, but—" "You're always so solemn about these things, Havelock. Not at all like your late father. Think mythologically. He can read the street. He can hear its voice, take its temperature, read its mind. It talks to him through his boots. Policemen are just as superstitious as other people. Even the other watch-house was attacked tonight. Sorry, every other watch-house was attacked tonight. Oh, Swing's people egged it on, but it was malice and stupidity that did the most damage. But not in Treacle Mine Road. No. Keel opened the doors and let the street inside. I wish I knew more about him. I'm told that in Pseudopolis he was considered to be a slow, thoughtful, and sensible. He certainly seems to have bloomed here. I inhumed a man who attempted to nip him in the bud. Really? That doesn't sound like Swing. How much do I owe you? The young man called Havelock gave a shrug. Call it $1, he said. That's very cheap. He wasn't worth more. I should warn you, though. Soon you may want me to deal with Keel. Surely someone like him wouldn't side with people like Winder and Swing. He's a side all by himself. He's a complication. You may think it best if he ceased to complicate. The rattling of the coach underlined the silence of this remark. It was moving through the richer part of the city now, where there was more light, and the curfew, being for poorer people, was less rigorously observed. The figure opposite the assassin stroked the cat on her lap. No, he'll serve some purpose, said Madame. Everyone is telling me about Keel. In a world where we all move in curves, he proceeds in a straight line, and going straight in a world of curves makes things happen. She stroked the cat. It yowled softly. It was ginger and had an expression of astonishing smugness, although periodically it scratched at its collar. On a different subject, she said, what was that business with the book? I did not like to take too much notice. Oh, it was an extremely rare volume I was able to track down, on the nature of concealment. That stupid hulk of a boy burned it. Yes, that was a piece of luck. I was afraid he might try to read it, although, Havelock smiled wanly, someone would have had to have helped him with the longer words. Was it valuable? Priceless, especially now that it's been destroyed. Ah, it contained information of value, possibly involving the colour dark green? Will you tell me? I could tell you, Havelock smiled again, but then I would have to find someone to pay me to kill you. Then don't tell me, but I do think Dog Botherer is an unpleasant nickname. When your name is Vetinari, madam, you're happy enough if it's merely Dog Botherer. Can you drop me off a little way from the guild, please? I'll go in via the roof. I have a tiger to attend to before I go up to... you know. A tiger? How exciting! She stroked the cat again. You found your way in yet? Vetinari shrugged. I've known my way for years, madam, but now he has a half a regiment around the palace, with irregular patrols and spot checks. I can't get through them. Only let me get inside, please, and the men there are no problem. The cat pawed at its collar. Is it possible he is allergic to diamonds? Said Madame. She held up the cat. Is you allergic to diamonds, then? Havelock sighed, but inwardly, because he respected his aunt. He just wished she was a bit more sensible about cats. He felt instinctively that if you were going to fondle a cat while discussing matters of intrigue, that it should be a long-haired white one. It shouldn't be an elderly street tom with irregular bouts of flatulence. What about the sergeant? He said, shifting along the seat as politely as possible. The lady, all in lilac, lowered the cat gently to the seat. There was a distressing smell. I think I should meet Mr. Keel as soon as possible, she said. Perhaps he can be harnessed. The party is tomorrow night. Do you mind opening a window? I'm all about the sections with young Vetinari. Just love him so much. Such a fangirl. Sorry about that. A little later that night, Downey was walking unsteadily back to his study after a convivial time in the prefect's common room, when he noticed that a torch had gone out. With a swiftness that might have surprised someone who saw no further than his flushed face and unsteady walk, he pulled out a dagger and scanned the corridor. He glanced up at the ceiling, too. There were grey shadows everywhere, but nothing more than that. Sometimes torches did go out all by themselves. He stepped forward. When he woke up in his bed next morning, he put the headache down to some bad brandy, and some scag had painted orange and black stripes on his face. It started to rain again. Vimes liked the rain. Street crime went down when it rained. People stayed indoors. Some of the best nights of his career had been rainy, when he'd stood in the shadows in the lee of some building, head tucked in so that there was barely anything showing between his helmet and his collar, and listened to the silvery rustle of the rain. Once he'd been standing so quietly, so withdrawn, so not there, that a fleeing robber who'd evaded his pursuers had leaned against him to catch his breath, and, when Vimes put his arms around him and whispered, "Gotcha!" into his ear, the man apparently did in his trousers what his dear mother, some 40 years before, had very patiently taught him not to do. The people had gone home. The sewn-up Gappy had been escorted to Old Cobbler's, where Fred Colin patiently explained the events to the man's parents, with his round red face radiating honesty. Lorne was possibly getting some use out of his bed. And the rain gurgled in the downpipes, and gushed from the gargoyles, and swirled in the gutters, and deadened all sound. Useful stuff, rain. Vimes picked up a bottle of Mrs. Arbiter's best ginger beer. He remembered it. It was gassy as hell, and therefore hugely popular. A young boy could, with encouragement and training, eventually manage to belch the whole first verse of the national anthem after just one swig. This is an important social skill when you're 8 years old. He'd chosen Colin and Waddy for this task. He wasn't going to involve young Sam. It wasn't that what he was planning was illegal, as such. It was just that it had the same colour and smell as something illegal, and Vimes didn't want to have to explain. The cells were old, much older than the building above them. The iron cages were fairly new, and didn't take up all the space. There were other cellars beyond an arch, containing nothing more than rats and rubbish, but, and that was important, they couldn't be seen from the cages. Vimes got the men to carry the dead bowman through. Nothing wrong with that. It was the middle of the night, filthy weather, no sense in waking up the people at the mortuary when there was a nice cold cellar. He watched through the spy hole in the door as the body was taken past the cells. It caused a certain stir, especially in the first man he'd brought in. The other two had the look of men who'd seen a lot of bad stuff in the name of making money. If they were hired to steal or murder or be a copper, it was all the same to them, and they'd learned not to react too readily to deaths that were not their own. The first man, though, was getting nervous. Vimes had nicknamed him Ferret. He was the best dressed of the three, all in black. The dagger had been expensive, and, Vimes had noticed, he had a silver death's head ring on one finger. The other two had dressed nondescript, and their weapons had been workmanlike, nothing much to look at but well used. No real assassin would wear jewellery at work. It was dangerous, and it shone. But Ferret wanted to be a big man. He probably checked himself in the mirror before he went out to make sure he looked cool. He was the sort of little twerp that got a kick out of showing his dagger to women in bars. Ferret, in short, had big dreams. Ferret had imagination. Well, that was fine. The watchman returned and picked up the packages Vimes had prepared. "Remember, we do it fast," he said. "They're worried, they're tired, no one's come for them, and they've just seen a very dead colleague. We don't want to give the first two time to think. Understand?" They nodded. "And we leave the little one till last. I want him to have lots of time." Ferret was considering his prospects. Regrettably, this didn't take long. He'd already had a row with the other two. Some rescue team they'd been. They weren't even dressed right, but the Brown jobs hadn't done things as per spec. Everyone knew they backed away. They weren't supposed to fight back or show any kind of intelligence. The main cell door was flung back. "It's ginger beer time!" roared someone, and a watchman ran through with a box of bottles and disappeared into the rooms beyond. There wasn't much light in here. Ferret cowered against the wall and saw two watchmen unlock the cell next door, drag the shackled occupant upright and out into the corridor, and then hustled him around the corner. The voices had a slight echo. "Hold him down. Mind his legs. Right, let's have the bottle. Give it a proper shake, otherwise it won't work." "Okay, friend. Anything you want to tell us? Your name? No? Well, it's like this. Right now we don't care a whole lot if you talk or not. There was a loud pop, a hiss, and then a scream, an explosion of agony. After it had died away, the trembling ferret heard someone say, "Quick, get the next one, before the captain catches us." He cringed back as 2 watchmen rushed into the next cell, dragged out the struggling prisoner, and hustled him into the darkness. "All right, one chance. Are you going to talk? Yes? No? Too late!" Once again the pop, once again the hiss, once again the scream. It was louder and longer this time, and ended in a kind of bubbling sound. Ferret crouched against the wall, fingers in his mouth. Around the corner, sitting in the light of one lantern, Colin nudged Vimes, wrinkled his nose, and pointed down. There was a gully that ran between all the cells, as a primitive sop to hygiene. Now a thin trickle was inching its way along it. Ferret was nervous. "Gotcha," thought Vimes, but a good imagination needs a little more time. He leaned forward, and the other 2 moved closer expectantly. "So," he said in a low whisper, "have you boys had your holidays yet?" After a few minutes of very small talk, he stood up, strode around the last occupied cell, unlocked the door, and grabbed Ferret, who was trying to squeeze into a corner. "No, please, I'll tell you whatever you want to know," the man yelled. "Really?" said Vimes. "What's the orbital velocity of the moon?" "What? Oh, you'd like something simpler," said Vimes, dragging the man out of the cell. "Fred, Waddy, he wants to talk. Bring a notebook." It took half an hour. Fred Colin wasn't a fast writer, and when the painful sound of his efforts concluded with the stab of his last full stop, Vimes said, "Okay, sir, now you write down at the end, 'I, Gerald Leastways, currently staying at the Young Men's Pagan Association, am making this statement of my own free will and not under duress,' and then you sign it. Or else. Got it?" "Yes, sir." The initials G.L. had been inscribed on the dagger. Vimes believed them. He'd met plenty of Leastwayses in his career, and they tended to spill their guts at the mere thought of spilling their guts. And when they did, you got everything. Anyone who had seen the ginger beer trick used on somebody would confess to anything. "Well now," he said cheerfully, standing up, "thank you for your cooperation. Want to lift to Cable Street?" Ferret's expression, if not his mouth, said, "Huh?" "We've got to drop off your friends," Vimes said, raising his voice slightly. "Todsy and Muffer. We'll drop the dead one off at the mortuary. Just a bit of paperwork for you." He nodded at Colin. "One copy of your helpful statement, 1 certificate of death from the pox doctor for the late mystery man, and rest assured we'll track down his murderer. A chitty from Mossy about the ointment he put on Muffer's feet. Oh, and a receipt for 6 bottles of ginger beer." He put a hand on Ferret's shoulder and gently walked him around to the next cellar, where Todsy and Muffer were sitting gagged, bound, and livid with rage. On a table nearby was a box containing 6 bottles of ginger beer. The corks were heavily wired down. Ferret stared at Vimes, who inserted a finger in his mouth, blew up his cheeks, and flicked out the finger with a loud pop. Waddy hissed between his teeth. Fred Colin opened his mouth, but Vimes clamped a hand over it. "No, don't," he said. "Funny thing, Gerald, but Fred here screams out loud at times for no reason at all." "You tricked me!" Ferret wailed. Vimes patted him on the shoulder. "Trick?" he growled. "How so, Gerald?" "You made me think you were doing the ginger beer trick." "Ginger beer trick?" said Vimes, his brow wrinkling. "What's that?" "You know! You brought the stuff down here." "We don't drink alcohol on duty, Gerald. What's wrong with a little ginger beer? We don't know any tricks with the stuff, Gerald. What tricks do you know? Seen any good tricks lately, Gerald? Do tell." At last it dawned on Ferret that he should stop talking. It was about half an hour too late. The expressions on what could be seen of the faces of Todsy and Muffer suggested that they wanted a very personal word with him. "I demand protective custody," he managed. "Just when I'm letting you go, Gerald?" said Vimes. "As you said in your statement. What was it, Fred? Something about just obeying orders? All that stuff about mixing with the mobs and throwing things at coppers and soldiers? You didn't want to do that, I know. You didn't like being around in Cable Street watching people being beaten up and being told what to confess to, 'cause it's plain to me you're not that sort. You're small fry, I understand that. I say we call it quits. How about you?" "Please, I'll tell you all I know," Ferret squeaked. "You mean you haven't?" Vimes roared. He spun around and grabbed a bottle. "Yes, no, I mean, if I sit quiet I'm sure I'll remember some more." Vimes held his gaze for a moment, and then dropped the bottle back in the crate. "All right," he said. "It'll be $1 a day, meals extra." "Right you are, sir." Vimes watched Ferret scuttle back into his cell and shut the door behind him. Vimes turned to Fred and Waddy. "Go and wake up Marilyn," he said. "Let's deliver the other 3. The rain was falling steadily in a thin, mist-filled Cable Street. The wagon came out of nowhere. Fred had urged Marilyn into something approaching a canter down the street, and when the horse came around the corner she was trying to keep ahead of the heavy, rumbling cart behind. As the hurry-up wagon passed the station, the rear doors were flung open and 2 bodies tumbled out onto the wet cobbles. The guards rushed forward. 1 or 2 of them fired after the retreating carts, and the arrows clattered harmlessly off the black iron strips. The other men approached the tied-up bodies with some care. There were groans, punctuated by swear words, and, pinned to one man, some paperwork. They read the note. They did not laugh. Vimes unharnessed the old horse, rubbed her down, and checked on her feed. Perhaps it was his imagination, but the feed bins seemed to be filling up in the last day or 2. Guilty consciences were at work, maybe. Then he walked out into the cool night air. The lights were on in the watch-house. It was a beacon, now the street lamps had been doused. Beyond the walls of the yard the real night had closed in, and the old night with its tendrils of fog and crawling shadows. He relaxed, and wore it like an overcoat. A shadow near the gate was deeper than it ought to be. He felt for his cigar case again, cursed, and pulled a cigar out of his shirt sleeve. He cupped his hands when he lit it, but kept his eyes tight shut to hold the night vision. Then he looked up and blew a smoke ring. Yes, everyone thought black didn't show up at night. They were wrong. He walked over to shut the gate, and then pulled out his sword in one fluid movement. Sadie raised her head, revealing a pale oval of a face in the depths of her bonnet. "Good evening, kind sir," she said. "Good morning, Sadie," said Vimes warily. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "Madam wants to see you, kind sir." "If you mean Rosie, I've been a bit busy." Dotsy's handbag hit him on the back of the head. "Madam doesn't like waiting, dearie," were the last words he heard before the night closed in all the way. Okay, and Anna will be able to read the next section. We're halfway now. It only gets better from here.